Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Curry's World History. I've got my cup. Have you got yours? What are we going to talk about today? Today, we're going to answer the age-old question, what happens when you try to throw a couple of dudes out a third-floor window to murder them, but instead, they survive? And the answer is, you get 30 years bad luck for your entire continent. So, where are we today? That's Bug Light here in South Portland. Beyond it, in the distance, is Mackworth Island. Over here is the coastline of the city of Portland. So if you've ever taken one of the Casco Bay ferries, it would go right out that way, right by the lighthouse that you're seeing off in that direction. So what are we doing today? We're going to talk about Central Europe. We're going to start by talking about something called the 30 Years' War. How and why did it happen? Well, the big deal is Lutheranism, okay? So Lutheranism happened around 1520, and over the course of the next 35 years, the Catholic Church tried to fight back against it so much that eventually both sides came to a draw. The Protestant Lutherans, your first blank is Protestants here for chapter 21, section 3, the Protestant Lutherans divided Germany with the Catholic Germans. The peace deal between these two groups was called the Peace of Augsburg. We covered it in a previous video. The Peace of Augsburg basically said, cuius regio, eius religio, which means whoever owns the region, they get to pick the religion. So this idea, cuius regio, eius religio, interestingly, only applied to Catholics and Lutherans. But the problem was that Lutherans weren't the only kind of Protestants anymore. Other kinds of Protestants had grown up in Europe, and these people were fighting for equality as well. Both sides, the Lutherans and the Catholics, were disturbed by the rise of Calvinism. John Calvin was a thinker who came out, again, we covered him in a previous video. John Calvin was the one who said that your ultimate destination, heaven or hell, had already been decided by God, even before the earth was created and cooled down. Remember what that idea was called? Predestination. So Calvin and his predestination had become a big deal in France, where they were called the Huguenots from the last lecture, and in Germany, German Calvinists. So again, another place where Calvinists became important was what we today call the Czech Republic. Back then, it was called Bohemia. And in 1618, the king of Bohemia died. Now, normally you'd think that a king would pass on their power to their son once they died, but this is happening inside the Holy Roman Empire. And in the Holy Roman Empire, the Holy Roman Emperor got to choose the next king. Now, the old king who had just died in 1618 had been friendly and tolerant towards Calvinists. The new king that was picked, a guy called Ferdinand of Styria, he was not friendly towards Calvinists. He was hardcore Catholic. He was a member of the Habsburg family. And so when he took over, he shut down Calvinist churches in Bohemia. It ended up being really bad. The Bohemians, the people of the Czech Republic, were very, very angry at what was happening. And so on one particular morning, they went to the royal palace to deliver to the king their grievances. And the king wasn't there. He was out hunting. I'm going to quote a history book. This is a good one. This is A History of Modern Europe from the Renaissance to the Present by John Merriman. And here's the actual quote of what happened, okay? On May 23rd, 1618, a crowd of protesters carried a petition to Prague's Hracany Palace, where representatives of the royal government had gathered, basically the king's council. The crowd stormed into the council chamber, engaged Catholic officials in a heated debate, organized an impromptu trial. They put the king's advisors on trial and hurled two of the royal delegates from the window. The crowd below roared its approval of this defenestration. an elegant term for throwing someone out a window, angered only that neither man had actually died in the fall. Catholic partisans construed their good fortune as a miracle, as the rumor spread that guardian angels had swooped down to pluck the falling dignitaries from the sky. The Protestants claimed that the men had been saved because they fell into large dung heaps in the gardens below. So yeah, the deal is this. If you throw someone out a window, there is a historical name for it, called a defenestration. Now, get this. It happened so often in Europe, in the Middle Ages and the Italian Renaissance period and the period after, that you have to specifically mention which defenestration you're talking about. So this was the Defenestration of Prague. Here's my favorite part. There were so many defenestrations that happened just in the city of Prague that you actually have to specify that this is the Defenestration of Prague of 1618. Okay? Mind blown, right? Anyway, this is the Defenestration of Prague, 1618. And as the book mentioned, they didn't die. These guys were thrown out a third-floor window, and they survived. And Catholics said it was because angels grabbed them and floated them down to the earth safely. And Protestants said no. You'll notice the date in that reading. It was planting season in the royal gardens. And so there were heaps of poo, manure, in the gardens, being ready to be distributed throughout the gardens. And so these guys landed in giant piles of dung. But they survived. Now, Ferdinand wasn't just going to take this lying down. He was out hunting. When he came back, he decided to go to war against his people, against these Protestant Calvinists. And this started what's called the 30 Years' War. Both sides had to use a lot of mercenaries. As we talked about in the last couple of lectures, mercantilism. Mercantilism is the idea that you need to save up your gold and silver in peacetime so that you can use it to buy mercenaries, because there was no such thing as regular permanent armies in the 1600s. So in 1618, we have mercenaries being signed up for the Protestant side, the Calvinists, and being signed up for the Catholic side. Sometimes the governments couldn't find the money to pay the soldiers, and so the soldiers rioted and looted either the enemy territory or even the territory of the side that they were fighting for, just to get money and just to get the food to survive. Millions of people in the middle of Europe died in the 30 Years' War. It was nasty. It was brutal. Disease spread like crazy. Mercenaries would loot cities and towns. They'd rape people and murder them, burn down farms, steal everything they had, and leave people to die of starvation. This was absolutely horrendous. And this is happening in Germany for 30 years. The Habsburg family won the first parts of the war. See, the 30 Years' War is not actually one war that goes for 30 years. It was 4 different wars. The first part of the war is called the Bohemian Phase. And in the Bohemian Phase, that's where the people of Bohemia went to the capital, Prague, and threw out the king's advisors. And then Ferdinand the king crushed the rebellion in the Battle of the White Mountain. He beat Frederick, the guy who was planning to take his place. So that ended the Bohemian phase of the war. It lasted about 2.5 years. And then there was like another 3 years of peace. But then the King of Denmark was also not just King of Denmark, he was also a duke of some lands inside the Holy Roman Empire. So he had to obey the emperor. The emperor had said, you know what? I don't even think the Peace of Augsburg is fair anymore. The Catholics are so big and so strong and so cool that from here on out, we're not even going to follow the Peace of Augsburg. Being a Lutheran isn't even okay. You have to be Catholic. Now, the King of Denmark, King Christian, said, no, that's not cool, right? Lutherans are okay. Lutherans are legal. And so he started a war against the Holy Roman Empire to preserve the right to be Lutheran inside the dukedom that he had in the empire. Well, He got crushed after a couple of years. That was called the Danish phase of the war, nowhere near as yummy as it sounds. So the Danish phase was over within a couple of years, and then a few years later, the King of Sweden decided that he was going to fight to preserve being Lutheran. And this started the Swedish phase of the war. The Swedish phase of the war lasted a long time, and their king, the next blank, Gustavus Adolphus, was really, really good at being a general. He was a brilliant commander, and he definitely delayed the victory that the imperial armies were going to have over the Protestants. But eventually, even Gustavus Adolphus couldn't stop the victory. He was killed in battle, and within about a year, the imperial forces, the Holy Roman Empire, had defeated the Swedes. So that part of the war was over. That's 3 whole phases that are done and over with. Then the French, even though they were Catholic, the French hated the Holy Roman Empire so much. They hated the Habsburg family so much that they got involved fighting on the Protestant side. They were concerned with keeping the Habsburg family from tipping the balance of power too much and having absolute control over everything around France. So even though France was a Catholic country, and they were being run at this time by Cardinal Richelieu, a Catholic cardinal, France still sided with the Protestants. And so Richelieu and King Louis XIII decided to fund more mercenaries for Sweden and start their own mercenary army to invade the Holy Roman Empire from the other side, so that the empire was surrounded and had to fight a 2-front war. This is called the French-Swedish phase of the war. It's the last phase. By 1648, the French and the Swedes had won. They managed to fight the empire to a standstill, and unfortunately for Germany, it was a complete smoldering wreck, because all the battles of the war pretty much had been fought in Germany. The people had been devastated, starved, died of disease. It was a smoldering, miserable chessboard of pain and death. Really, really awful. In 1648, when the war was declared over, that's when the Holy Roman Empire and Spain, both ruled by the Habsburgs, had to finally agree to let certain places go as independent. The Dutch, even though they had claimed to be independent for around 40 years by now, they were finally given their legal independence from the Spanish. And the Switzerland was granted its total freedom and independence by the Holy Roman Empire, as long as they promised to be neutral in all wars that would happen in the future. So the Swiss got their independence, the Dutch got their independence. The 30 Years' War was big for that reason. But the 30 Years' War was even bigger than that. Their peace treaty, signed in 1648, was called the Peace of Westphalia. Westphalia. The Peace of Westphalia. And the Peace of Westphalia basically set the rules for what in the future would make an independent country free to be an independent country. And it determined that from here on out, countries would have to negotiate with each other. Countries would have to keep permanent ambassadors in each other's countries so that they could negotiate in the future. So this set up what we call the modern state system. State meaning country. The treaty crippled the Holy Roman Empire, and it made the big winner of the war, France, much stronger. France got a lot of territories that had been part of the empire before, and they got some Spanish territories added to them. This war was the last major religious war in European history. After this, we're not going to fight wars between Catholics and Protestants on a large scale. More importantly, this war started the trend about how countries should negotiate with each other in the future and what makes a country free to be a country. So let's take a look at, outside of this 30 Years' War, what makes up Central Europe and Eastern Europe. Interestingly, you got the Black Death, right? I know, a happy subject, a subject that we're completely unfamiliar with in today's world. The idea that disease could rob thousands or tens of thousands of people of their lives all of a sudden, wipe out society, force people to stop interacting with each other, board up houses in quarantine. Never seen it before, ever. Anyway, the Black Death. In Western Europe, the Black Death killed off a lot of people, and those who were left ran away and they went to the cities. And so cities became bigger and stronger and more important. But in Eastern Europe, the opposite thing happened. With the peasants dying, the lords got a tighter control over the people on their medieval manors. They managed to have more control because there were fewer cities in Eastern Europe. There were more plantations. And so in Central and Eastern Europe, the Black Death doesn't start a commercial revolution of people moving to cities and getting more pay. It makes people more slaves. Serfdom became stronger in Eastern Europe instead of weaker. In the 1600s, Poland and the Muslim Empire known as the Ottoman Empire, under Suleiman the Magnificent, and the Holy Roman Empire. All three of these territories were relatively weak. The emperor, the Holy Roman Emperor's family, remember that family? Hopefully you've heard the name enough by now. Habsburgs, the Habsburg family, tried regaining control over a lot of territory in Central and Eastern Europe, and they were pretty successful. By 1711, Holy Roman Emperor Charles VI family had managed to take back Hungary and Bohemia. He ruled over a diverse group of countries. It was never an easy job to be Holy Roman Emperor because the ethnic groups that you're in control of, there's just a huge number of languages, different cultures, different government systems. And if you're the emperor, you're officially in charge of it all. But unless you devote 100% of your attention to each of the different ethnic groups, you're never going to be their real absolute leader. And you just can't do that. Charles VI died without any sons. But before he died, he made all the other leaders in Europe agree to a compromise that even though legally a daughter was not allowed to take the throne of the Holy Roman Empire, that all these kings in Europe would let his daughter, Maria Theresa, take charge. However, after he died and Maria Theresa took the throne as Empress of the Holy Roman Empire, there was one country whose ruler had just died also, and a new king had jumped up to take control, and he said, I'm not bound by that old treaty. I'm not bound by the pragmatic sanction that said that we all agree to let a woman take the throne. His name was Frederick the Great of the King of Prussia. He's one of the more famous rulers in European history, and one of the greatest military rulers since Julius Caesar, really. So Frederick the Great of Prussia said, I didn't agree to that. Now I'm in charge of Prussia. I declare war on the Holy Roman Empire. Why did he do it? Did he do it because he really didn't believe a woman could take charge? No. He did it because the Holy Roman Empire had good farmland, and Frederick needed that land. So he declared war on Austria, on the Holy Roman Empire, just to grab that land, and it worked. So let's talk about Prussia a little bit. In a place that is actually made up of parts of Poland and Germany and Russia today, Prussia was ruled by a royal family, a difficult one to spell, so I'm going to say it a couple of times and spell it twice for you. They're the Hohenzollerns, Hohenzollerns, the Hohenzollerns, Hohenzollerns. So this Hohenzollern family produced the rulers for Prussia, starting in about the year 1640 with a leader named Frederick William. Prussian kings decided that they were going to need super strong armies, and with these armies they would protect themselves and make their territory bigger. They were the Sparta of the north, really. The Prussians were like ancient Sparta, very militaristic, dedicated to their army. And interestingly, the funny thing is Prussia's rulers throughout their entire history only ever had two different names. You could be Frederick, or you could be William. Or actually, you could be Frederick William. So really just two names that they ever chose from for hundreds of years for their rulers, Frederick or William. The kings of Prussia became absolute rulers. They charged really, really high taxes to the people in their country so that they could recruit strong, tall men from all over Europe, sometimes using trickery and force. So imagine this. Imagine you're out with your buddies, okay? And you've been out drinking, you've been to the bar, and you're like 6 foot, 6'2", maybe even 6'4", which is super unusual back then because guys were like 5'8" on average back then. So, okay, imagine you're 6 foot, 6'2", 6'4", you're out drinking with the guys, and these 4 or 5 guys from another table buy you drinks for a couple of hours, and you pound them down, and you get so drunk that you pass out. When you wake up in the morning, you're in the Prussian army, because those guys would headhunt all over Europe. They'd go to bars and inns and pubs and taverns, and they would pick out who they wanted, and then they would start buying them drinks until they passed out. And when you woke up in the morning, you were kidnapped, and you were made part of the King of Prussia's army. So, go Prussia. In order for the nobles of Prussia, called Junkers, Junkers, the nobles were called Junkers. In order for the Junkers to go along with letting the king have absolute power, what did the Junkers get in return? They didn't have to pay taxes. And also, they were made army officers, so they got to be hardcore, tough, macho people. Very, very respected in a militaristic society. And from this, Prussia gets its nickname, the Sparta of the North. In 1740, Frederick the Great and Maria Theresa of Austria both became the leaders of their separate countries. And almost instantly they went to war, because Frederick the Great said, I don't recognize her right to be ruler, I want that farmland over there. Frederick wanted Silesia, 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 which was really, really good farmland. So, among other things that Frederick the Great wanted, he decided to invade for Silesia. When he invaded, it started a war called the War of the Austrian Succession, because this is who should be the ruler of Austria, the Holy Roman Empire, Maria Theresa or not, right? So officially it's the War of Austrian Succession. Maria Theresa actually surprised Frederick the Great by being a good, strong leader in war, even though she was a woman, right? So this idea that a woman, this misogynistic idea that a woman can't be an effective ruler, Maria Theresa nipped that in the bud. She went to Hungary, part of her empire, a big part of her empire, with a lot of soldiers, and they weren't sure that they were going to be okay with a woman leader. But Maria Theresa went there, and she went with her baby in her hands. She had a baby boy. And she said to the Hungarian parliament, if you fight for me today, you're not just fighting for me. You're fighting for this empire. And you're fighting for this boy's rightful claim to the throne. This boy is going to be your next emperor. So don't quit now. He deserves your support. Kind of like a Lion King moment almost. So the Hungarians decided right away, yes, she's worth it, the kid's worth it, let's go to war, let's support the empire. Britain helped her too, because Britain was a little bit unsure about the rise of this new emperor, this new ruler, Frederick the Great. So they wanted to stop Frederick the Great. And a big reason that Britain did it as well is because the French had taken the side of Frederick the Great. They wanted to help Frederick because it would hurt the Holy Roman Empire and the Habsburg family. So, interesting situation. France joins Frederick the Great, but Britain joins Austria, the Holy Roman Empire. The war ended in 1748 as a draw, but Austria lost Silesia. Frederick the Great got to keep it. After the war, Maria Theresa and the other members of the Habsburg family decided that their worst enemy wasn't France anymore. It was now Prussia. And so instead of focusing on hating France, they made a deal with France. If France would give the Austrians a princess that could marry, the other way around. The Austrians were going to give France a princess for Prince Louis to get married to cement this deal between two old enemies who have now decided to become friends. And so Princess Maria Antonia got married to Prince Louis. Later on, she's going to be called a much more French name that I think you might have heard of, Marie Antoinette. So Maria Antonia, Marie Antoinette, the reason this Austrian princess becomes the Queen of France and loses her head is because Austria and France decide to stop hating each other and start being buddies, because Prussia is now a bigger threat. So Austria decides to start another war to take back Silesia from Prussia. Britain was also willing to switch sides. They didn't want to fight on the French side now, and so they joined the Prussians, ruled by Frederick the Great. This was called the Diplomatic Revolution because they're switching sides. They're making a full turnaround. The Diplomatic Revolution of 1756. In that year, Frederick the Great and Maria Theresa fight the next war. It's not the War of Austrian Succession anymore. It's called the 7 Years' War. Of course, it wasn't called that at the beginning. They didn't know it was going to last for 7 years. But Frederick invaded one of Austria's best friends in Germany, a place called Saxony. It became a world war. The 7 Years' War became a world war because Britain was fighting against France. Spain got into it too, and they all had colonies. They had colonies in the Caribbean, they had colonies in North America, they even had colonies in India. And so this war gets fought on multiple continents. In America, the English and the French colonists fought against each other, using the help of the Native Americans, in what we call the French and Indian Wars. Of course, we call it the French and Indian Wars because we're English-speaking, and because the English won, and so they got to name the war. It was the War of the English versus French and Indians. French and Indian War. This included the very first battlefield experience of a guy from Virginia who would later go on to relative fame named George Washington. The English captured the French capital city in North America, Quebec. It was an interesting battle. The English, under General Wolfe, who had been a veteran of several wars before, including a war in Scotland, where the Scottish rebelled against the English, General Wolfe sailed his ships up the St. Lawrence River, and because Quebec is literally, if you're on the river, it's like a cliff. And so the English sailed further down the river, unloaded much further away, for the most part. Some of them scaled the cliff in the middle of the night, and they attacked the French army in the morning on the plains of Abraham. And the French general Montcalm was killed in the battle. But General Wolfe was also killed in the battle too. The English won, they captured the city, but both of the commanding officers had been killed in that vicious battle. Britain was the big winner of the 7 Years' War because when Prussia won the land war, Britain won the naval war, which meant they took away French Canada, they took away French territory in Maine, they took away French territory in the Caribbean, and also a lot of French territory in India. France was a big loser in this war. Britain gained a ton of colonies. So, yeah. The next time we're together, we are going to talk about Russia and Ivan the Terrible and Peter the Great. So, good times, lots of brutality, nastiness, and a 12-tier government system. Who could ask for more? See you soon.